What if I told you that the most dangerous enemy on the Oregon Trail was not armed bandits or harsh natural elements, but an empty flour barrel? The history of the Wild West is often portrayed through the prism of shootouts and gold rushes, but the real battle for survival took place around the campfire when the last reserves of familiar food ran out. Hunger was a silent but constant companion that forced people to rethink the very concept of edible food and turn garbage into a source of life. In these harsh conditions, amazing culinary ingenuity was born, dictated not by the desire of a gourmet, but by the harsh necessity to survive at any cost. Women and men who found themselves far from civilization learned to trick their stomachs and create the illusion of satiety from the most unexpected ingredients. Watch this video to the end, and you will learn how ordinary vinegar replaced fresh fruit in desserts, and why miners were willing to pay gold for stale breadcrumbs that were impossible to chew. Are you ready to learn the truth about a dessert that lacked its main ingredient? As the wagons traveled further west, fresh fruit and berries became a distant memory of their former life in the East. However, the human psyche required not only calories for survival, but also small joys that could sustain morale on the endless road. This is how the famous vinegar pie appeared, which the settlers bitterly and ironically called the pie of despair. The housewives of that time performed a real chemical miracle, using the simplest ingredients that did not spoil for months. The filling was based on a mixture of sugar, eggs, a small amount of flour, and apple cider vinegar diluted with water. The secret was in the balance of acidity and sweetness, which amazingly imitated the taste of lemon, unavailable in the prairies. Vinegar provided the necessary sourness, while sugar and eggs created the texture of custard, familiar from home baking. Preparing this dish was a kind of ritual, an attempt to recreate comfort and normality in conditions of complete uncertainty. The dough was kneaded with melted lard, as the butter had gone rancid in the first weeks of the journey. Despite its strange name and ingredients, this pie was a real treat for weary travelers. It allowed them to forget for a few minutes about the dust, heat, and monotony of a diet consisting of dried meat and beans. Cookbooks from that era have preserved dozens of variations of this recipe, which speaks to its incredible popularity among the pioneers. Sometimes, instead of vinegar, they used citric acid if it was in the medicine cabinet, or even green tomatoes boiled in syrup. This dish demonstrates how important the psychological component of nutrition was for people cut off from civilization. Food ceased to be just fuel for the body and became a tool for preserving sanity and connection to home. The very idea of replacing expensive and perishable foods with cheap alternatives formed the basis of the entire frontier cuisine. People learned to see the potential in what was previously considered unsuitable for the festive table. Surprisingly, this recipe outlived its creators and returned to American tables during the Great Depression, when saving money once again became a matter of survival. The taste of the pie of despair became the taste of hope for several generations who were going through hard times. Today, it is difficult for us to imagine how one could enjoy a dessert made from vinegar when we have access to supermarkets. But for the pioneers, a slice of this pie was a symbol that life goes on, no matter what. We would love to hear your opinion. Do you think you could tell the difference between this pie and a real lemon pie if you didn't know the ingredients? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. What if I told you that the meat the pioneers ate was often older than their journey itself? For many, this sounds unbelievable, because in movies we are used to seeing scenes of hunting and grilling fresh steak over a campfire. However, the reality was much harsher, and fresh game was more of a lucky find than the norm. The journey across the plains and mountains lasted for months, and people could not count on constant hunting. Food had to be reliable and durable. Otherwise, the caravan risked starvation. That is why salted meat became the staple of the pioneers' diet. The main source of protein in the Wild West was not fresh game, hunted with a well-aimed shot, as shown in westerns, but pork salted to a rock-hard consistency. Hunting was too unpredictable, and no one could count on catching an animal every day. Animal meat spoiled almost instantly in heat or dampness, so it could not be transported in large quantities. The fat quickly became rancid, and the fibers began to decompose after just a few hours. In such conditions, salted pork seemed to be the only reasonable choice. It gave people the confidence that even on the hardest day, they would have something edible. Salted pork, or sow belly, as it was contemptuously called on the frontier, was the only way to preserve meat in the absence of refrigerators. People did not particularly like it, but they understood its importance for survival. They took it with them on their travels, bought it at post stations, and saved it until the very last. Often it was this that helped them survive weeks when hunting was impossible or livestock milk yields fell sharply. Salted pork became a real lifeline. It could feed a family even when other supplies were running low. Pieces of fatty pork were placed in barrels and covered with a strong salt solution that killed any bacteria. This process was repeated over and over again so that the salt penetrated all the fibers. The barrels were carefully sealed to prevent moisture or insects from getting inside. Sometimes they were even tarred on the outside for better sealing. In this form, the meat became virtually immune to spoilage. It could withstand travel over rough terrain and long winters. In this state, the meat could be stored for years, withstanding the summer heat of the desert and the winter cold of the mountains. Even if the barrel stood in a cart under the scorching sun, the contents remained edible. This quality made salted meat invaluable to caravans crossing wild territories. Sometimes people found forgotten barrels that had been lying around for 2 or 3 years, and the meat inside was still edible. Of course, the taste left much to be desired, but in frontier conditions, taste was far from the main concern. The very fact that there was food was considered good luck. However, before consumption, this product required lengthy and complex preparation. Otherwise, it was impossible to eat. Without soaking, the salt literally burned the mouth and made the food unbearable. Pioneers knew that improper preparation could lead to dehydration and illness. Therefore, the cooking process became almost a ritual. People waited patiently for the water to soften the meat. Only then did the salted meat become somewhat edible. A piece of meat had to be soaked in water for several hours, and sometimes for a whole day, constantly changing the water to wash away the excess salt. The number of changes depended on how old the salted meat was and how thick the layer of salt remained. Women and cooks were accustomed to determining the degree of readiness by eye. Sometimes they had to taste a piece to see if they could continue cooking. The process was long and tedious, but it was unavoidable. People knew the value of each step. If there was not enough water, cooks resorted to a trick and boiled the salted meat in 2 or 3 changes of water, trying to make it at least a little edible. This allowed them to partially remove the excess salt without wasting precious reserves. The water could not be used after boiling because it became too salty and unusable. Travelers were careful not to waste a single ladleful. On routes where water was scarce, every drop was important. Therefore, ways to save water were vital. Despite all their efforts, the meat often remained tough and oversalted, causing intense thirst, which was dangerous in the desert. People understood that such food could lead to loss of strength, but they had no choice. Sometimes they preferred to eat less so as not to suffer from thirst. Some even left the meat in a pot of water overnight, hoping it would soften. However, salted meat had an amazing ability to remain firm, but it was precisely its durability that made it indispensable. Salted meat was often used not as a main dish, but as a flavor additive to bland porridge or beans. A small piece could change the taste of an entire pot, making the food more flavorful. This allowed people to save their supplies and satisfy their hunger at the same time. Beans and grains rarely had much flavor of their own, so adding fat and salt was a real lifesaver. People knew how to stretch their supplies for weeks. Cooking tricks saved families from starvation. A small piece of fatty, salty meat could add flavor and satiety to a huge pot of empty soup. The smell of such soup made tired travelers feel their strength returning. Even children who did not always like salted meat enjoyed eating such dishes. The calorie content of salted meat made any food more nutritious. This allowed travelers to maintain their strength during long journeys. Simple food became a source of energy. The fat rendered from salted meat was worth its weight in gold and was used to fry everything else. It served as the basis for most dishes, from bread cakes to fried vegetables. Without it, food was bland and difficult to digest. People collected every drop so as not to lose a single grain of energy. Fat replaced oil, which spoiled quickly and was too expensive. Therefore, it became a key ingredient in camp cooking. It replaced butter, which was impossible to preserve on long journeys, and served as a source of essential calories. Pioneers understood that fats helped them survive cold nights and difficult daytime treks. Even a small spoonful of melted fat could provide energy for several hours. In conditions of constant labor, this was extremely important. People treasured fat as much as gunpowder or clean water. It was part of their journey and survival strategy. Sometimes the quality of salted meat left much to be desired, and settlers had to eat rancid or darkened meat. The smell could be unpleasant, but the only alternative, going without food, was even worse. So people turned a blind eye to the flaws and ate what they had. Sometimes the meat was cooked longer to hide the smell. However, this did not always help. But refusing food was a luxury that no one could afford. But there was no choice. Throwing away a piece meant condemning the family to starvation in the future. Every product was considered valuable and carefully distributed for weeks ahead. People understood that every extra expense could cost them their lives when the cold weather came. Therefore, they saved every last crumb of food. This attitude fostered a special thriftiness. It helped them survive even in the most difficult seasons. Merchants often took advantage of inexperienced travelers, selling them barrels where bones and tendons were hidden under a layer of good meat. Such scams were common at crossroads and markets. Inexperienced people bought goods without knowing how to check their quality. Only later, after opening the barrel, did they realize that they had been victims of trickery. This caused real despair because the lost money could not be returned. But the lesson was remembered for a lifetime. Such deception could only be discovered during the journey when it was already impossible to return and demand the money back. At that moment, the family could find themselves on the brink of survival due to a lack of edible meat. Sometimes they had to share their supplies with neighboring caravans or hunt in places where there was almost no game. This slowed down the journey and increased the risk. Travelers tried to be more careful to avoid repeating mistakes, but deceivers always found new ways to enrich themselves. Despite its specific taste and toughness, salted meat saved thousands of lives, providing people with energy for hard physical labor. It became part of every working day, from cutting wood to moving carts. People knew that without it, their strength would quickly fade. Even the simplest dishes with salted meat created a feeling of satiety and reliability. This helped them endure hardships. Salted meat became a symbol of resilience. It was the foundation of the Wild West food pyramid, reliable and indestructible, like the rocks around it. It accompanied the pioneers every step of the way, from the first settlement camps to the distant frontier forts. Even when new products appeared, salted meat remained the basis of the diet. Its simplicity and durability became its main advantages. People treated it with respect, even if they didn't like it. It was part of their history. But even the most filling salted meat could not replace the morning ritual, without which many could not imagine starting their day. People needed a hot drink to help them wake up and get ready for work. However, on long journeys, coffee bean supplies quickly ran out. Then the search for substitutes began, leading to the most unexpected experiments. Some additives only vaguely resembled coffee, but people used everything. The thirst for the familiar taste was stronger. In the next chapter, you will learn what people did to get a cup of the invigorating black drink when the real beans ran out. The pioneers showed remarkable ingenuity in their attempts to recreate the familiar taste. Sometimes their recipes seemed strange, but they worked. These drinks kept their spirits up and gave them the strength to continue on their way. People shared their discoveries with each other. What do you think you could use to make coffee in the desert? Want to know a secret that will change your perception of morning coffee? For settlers, coffee was not just a drink, but a symbol of civilization, an anchor that kept them grounded in reality amid the wilderness. When supplies of green beans, which were usually roasted directly in a pan over a fire, ran low, A period of true ingenuity began. People couldn't accept the loss of this ritual and began to look for any substitutes that could give them a dark color and bitterness. One of the most popular substitutes was chicory root, which was collected, dried, roasted, and ground into powder. Chicory gave the drink a thick color and a tart taste, although it did not contain the caffeine necessary for invigoration. But the psychological effect of a hot mug of dark liquid was so strong that many did not notice the substitution or got used to it. If chicory was not available, barley, wheat, or even corn kernels were roasted until black. The grains were deliberately overcooked to obtain a characteristic burnt taste, vaguely reminiscent of strongly roasted coffee beans. In wooded areas, settlers collected acorns, removed their shells, and soaked them to remove the bitterness of the tannins. The acorns were then dried, roasted, and ground to produce a drink with a nutty aroma and oily texture. Sometimes desperation led to the use of even dried carrots or beets. Cut into cubes and charred over a fire, the resulting brew had a sweetish taste and vaguely resembled coffee only in color, but even that was enough to calm the nerves. In some regions of the Southwest, they used the seeds of local plants and shrubs, adopting the experience of indigenous peoples. These experiments were not always safe, but the thirst for the familiar taste pushed them to take risks. Coffee substitutes became so common that even after normal supplies returned, some families continued to add chicory or barley to real coffee. This was done both to save money and out of habit to the specific taste of frontier coffee. Real coffee was expensive and sold in green beans, which housewives had to roast and grind by hand every morning. Therefore, each cup of the real drink was perceived as a luxury that needed to be stretched out and cherished. The history of coffee substitutes is a story of how culture and habits prove stronger than circumstances. People were willing to drink burnt water just to maintain the appearance of normal life and home comfort by the fire. Thank you for watching. Where are you watching us from? What interested you most about these survival recipes? Like us, if you enjoy learning such details about everyday life. What if everything you were taught about the value of gold in the Wild West isn't entirely true? Many people are accustomed to thinking of gold as the main symbol of wealth in those days, but for most settlers, it remained a distant mirage. The real value was in a product that could be eaten every day, and that didn't let you down even in the most difficult times. It was these simple things that became real treasures in a world where everything depended on survival. Therefore, true wealth was not in what glitters, but in what can save you from hunger. This is how the real priorities of the frontier people were formed. The real gold that saved lives was corn, or more precisely, coarsely ground cornmeal. It was affordable, could be stored for a long time, and provided the energy needed for hard work. Travelers knew that even a small portion of corn porridge could sustain them for a long day. Unlike the refined dishes of the East Coast, this food was honest and reliable. It did not require any special cooking skills and was suitable for any level of income. Therefore, corn became the staple of most families' diets. Unlike wheat flour, which quickly molded and spoiled from dampness in wagons, corn was incredibly durable and versatile. Wheat could not withstand long journeys on rough roads, especially when exposed to rain and heat. Corn flour, on the other hand, could withstand temperature changes while remaining edible. Mice and insects did not affect it to the same extent as wheat. It did not clump together and retained its taste. These qualities made it indispensable. Sacks of cornmeal were a strategic reserve for every family setting out into the unknown. People understood that it was cornmeal that would help them survive the first difficult months in a new place. The grain was carefully packed into carts and protected from moisture, as it was considered a staple food. Sometimes they took even more of it than clothes or tools. It was more important than many other things that seemed valuable only at first glance. Corn was the basis of confidence in the future. This simple product could be used to prepare dozens of dishes, from liquid porridge to hard cakes that could be taken on the road. People valued it because it could be easily combined with almost any available ingredients. You could cook something simple or prepare a more substantial dish that could replace bread. These possibilities gave you freedom in choosing your diet, even when supplies were limited. Cornmeal often came to the rescue at the most inopportune moments. It was a truly universal solution. The simplest and most common dish was porridge cooked in water, or, if you were lucky, in milk. It was prepared at every stop, as it required a minimum of time and effort. It warmed them up in the cold morning hours and helped them perk up before a long journey. Often, entire families would eat it, sharing one large pot. The simplicity of this dish made it a favorite among children. Adults appreciated it for its filling qualities. It was eaten hot for breakfast, and the leftovers were left to solidify into a thick mass, which was then cut into slices. This technique allowed them to save food and not waste a single crumb. The solidified mass could easily be stored for several hours or even days. It could be taken with you to the field or on the road. This approach to food fostered thriftiness and practicality. Nothing should go to waste. These slices of solidified porridge were fried in lard until crispy, resulting in a hearty dish known as fried mamaliga or mush. Frying gave the dish a new flavor and made it more appetizing. Travelers enjoyed eating these slices even on cold evenings. They were dense, rich, and stayed warm longer than regular porridge. This made them the perfect food for traveling. People welcomed any variety in their diet. It was the perfect way to use leftovers and turn boring porridge into something new and appetizing. Many housewives were proud of their ability to cook delicious mush, which lifted the spirits of the whole family. Sometimes it was served with a drop of honey or berry sauce, if such delicacies were at hand. These small pleasures made the settlers' lives less gloomy. Even in harsh conditions, food could bring pleasure. Corn provided scope for creativity. Johnny cakes were also popular. Simple flatbreads made from cornmeal, water, and salt, baked in a pan or on a hot stone. They were loved for their affordability and quick preparation. Even a child could handle this type of baking. The cakes were dense and slightly crispy around the edges. They replaced bread where yeast was unavailable. This made them indispensable at every stop. They were dense, filling, and could be stored for several days without losing their nutritional properties. People packed them in cloth bags and took them on long journeys. They did not crumble or absorb moisture, which made them convenient for travel. In situations where hot food was unavailable, Johnny cakes were a real find. They helped people survive the hard hours in the saddle, and most importantly, they tasted good. Corn flour did not require yeast, which was difficult to keep active in camping conditions. Yeast spoiled quickly, especially in heat or dampness. However, corn flour allowed baking without unnecessary hassle. It provided a dense, nutritious base that was easy to fry. This eliminated many everyday difficulties. The simplicity of the recipes saved time and energy. This made it indispensable for quickly baking bread right at the campsite, without having to wait long for the dough to rise. People could light a small fire, mix the flour with water, and in a few minutes have hot food. Such quick results were very important in conditions of constant haste and lack of resources. This meant that long hours did not have to be spent preparing food. Every minute counted on the road. Therefore, corn flour was a real gift. Corn was often mixed with other available ingredients, such as pumpkin or berries, to add variety to the taste. These additions made the food more satisfying and flavorful. People used whatever they could find near the camp or on the farm. Sometimes they added dried fruit if they had it in stock. This turned simple flatbread into an almost festive dish. Even everyday meals became tastier. The sweetness of corn allowed them to save scarce sugar, making dishes more palatable. Sugar was expensive and rare, so it had to be used very sparingly. Corn dough helped create sweetness in a natural way. This made baked goods more desirable among children. The taste of corn dishes became a real comfort in difficult times. Simple foods brought joy. For many settlers, cornbread became a symbol of survival and overcoming difficulties. It accompanied them throughout their journey, from their first steps to their new home to the completion of construction. Its taste reminded them of long days of labor and short moments of rest. This bread was associated with perseverance and patience. It was coarse but honest. It embodied the strength of people accustomed to struggle. It was coarse and scratchy on the throat, but it gave strength to chop wood, build houses, and plow virgin soil. People knew that even a small piece could satisfy them for a long time. This made it especially valuable in difficult times when physical labor was overwhelming. Cornbread was like fuel that allowed them to move forward. They ate it without pleasure, but with gratitude. It became part of their character. Even when the opportunity arose to buy white flour, many continued to bake cornbread out of habit, considering it more filling and healthy. White flour was soft and pleasant to the taste, but quickly made you feel hungry. Cornbread stayed in the stomach longer and provided stable energy. People trusted what had saved their lives more than once. Therefore, traditions did not disappear, even with the development of trade. Tastes were shaped by experience. In the next chapter, you will learn about a product that was called the musical fruit and was the staple of cowboys' diets. This name did not appear by accident because the product had one funny property. It was affordable, cheap, and perfect for long journeys. People treated it with respect, despite its simplicity. This product became part of the life of everyone who worked with cattle. Why do you think cooks soaked this product overnight, risking their water supplies? Dried beans and beans were a real lifesaver for those who could not afford to eat meat regularly. Easy to transport, they increased in volume when cooked and produced a thick filling soup rich in vegetable protein. A bag of beans could feed a family for several months without requiring special storage conditions. However, cooking beans on the frontier was fraught with certain difficulties, the main one being water. In arid regions, wasting precious moisture on soaking beans was an unaffordable luxury. Therefore, housewives used slow simmering methods, cooking beans in a minimum amount of water in a covered pot. The famous cast iron Dutch ovens were ideal for this, creating the effect of a modern slow cooker. Beans were often cooked with a piece of salted meat or simply pork rinds for flavor and fat. Even if there was no meat, beans seasoned with salt and pepper or even molasses became a full meal. At cowboy and settler camps, the pot of beans was often left on the fire for days. Water was simply added, and new beans were added as the contents were eaten. This created a so-called eternal soup, the taste of which changed every day. There was a danger associated with the altitude. In the mountains, water boiled at a lower temperature. This meant that the beans could cook for hours but remain hard inside, leading to digestive problems. To speed up the process, a pinch of baking soda was sometimes added, if available. This helped soften the hard shell of the beans and reduce fuel consumption, which was also in short supply in the steppe. The leftover beans were never thrown away. They were mashed and fried the next morning. This is how the famous dish fried beans came to be, which has become a classic of southwestern cuisine. Cold boiled beans were used as a filling for tortillas or simply as a snack on the road. They were a universal source of fuel for the body, providing energy for the long journey. Beans were a symbol of the frontier's democracy. They were eaten by poor gold miners and rich cattle ranchers alike. But when even the beans ran out, people had to look under their feet for food. Are you ready for the shocking truth that people literally walked on their food? When food supplies ran low and scurvy began to loosen their teeth, settlers turned their attention to what we now consider weeds. Knowledge of the local flora, often learned from Native American tribes, became the difference between life and death. One of the most valuable plants was the dandelion, which was used in its entirety from the tops to the roots. Young leaves were used in salads, replacing fresh greens and providing vitamins. Dandelion roots were roasted and ground like coffee or boiled as a vegetable side dish. They were bitter but nutritious and helped to diversify the meager flour-based diet. Another lifesaver was goat's beard, or oyster plant, whose roots tasted like seafood. It was dug up, cleaned, and stewed to make a dish that seemed like a delicacy compared to bland porridge. Sorrel, quinoa, and nettles were gathered by the sackful and boiled in huge cauldrons, turning into thick green porridge. These plants were a powerful remedy for vitamin deficiency, restoring strength after a long winter. Frontier women quickly learned to distinguish between edible and poisonous plants, creating their own herb gardens. A mistake in this matter could cost the whole family their lives, so knowledge was passed on with great care. Wild onion and garlic bulbs were added to any dish to mask the smell of stale meat or musty flour. The pungent taste of these plants stimulated the appetite, which was often lost due to monotonous food. Elderberries, wild plums, and black chokeberries were dried in the sun to be added to pies or porridge in winter. This was the only available source of fruit sugar and vitamin C during the cold season. Gathering wild plants was the responsibility of women and the elderly, while men were busy hunting or building. This activity required patience and attention, but it provided a free and renewable resource. The frontier was harsh, but it offered opportunities to those who were observant and did not disdain simple food. In the next chapter, you will learn about a product called leaf iron that could break the teeth of a careless eater. How long do you think this bread could be stored? Hardtack, or hardtack, was the main bread product for the military, travelers, and gold prospectors throughout the 19th century. It became an integral part of the diet of anyone who found themselves on a long journey or serving far from cities. Their consistency was a symbol of stability where everything else could fail. Hardtack was so simple that it could be prepared even in the most primitive camping conditions. It was a product you could always rely on, and it was this reliability that made it indispensable. They were simple crackers made from flour and water, dried to a rock-hard consistency to completely remove moisture. The baking process was extremely simple, but it required patience and prolonged drying in the heat or in an oven. The goal was to ensure that there was not a drop of moisture left in the piece that could cause mold. These crackers were so dense that they could withstand shocks and falls. They did not crumble or break without effort. They were created with long trips in mind. Thanks to this, they did not mold and could be stored for years, and according to legend, even decades. Sailors told stories of eating biscuits baked long before they were born. Soldiers said that these crackers survived wars themselves. Facts confirm that some batches of hardtack did indeed last for decades. Its durability was almost legendary. This made biscuits the most reliable bread of their time. Outwardly, the biscuit resembled a thick cookie with holes, but in terms of hardness, it was closer to a brick. These holes were made specifically so that the dough would bake evenly and dry out. Its rough appearance did not reflect its practical use. It was far from homemade bread, but it did its job perfectly. People recognized hardtack at first glance. Its appearance became associated with travel and military service. Attempting to bite off a piece of such bread without prior preparation could result in a broken tooth. Soldiers joked that biscuits could serve as both weapons and building materials. Sometimes they were used to hammer together tent pegs or prop up wobbly tables. Even experienced travelers treated them with caution. Without softening, they remained almost inedible. Their hardness became part of legend. Therefore, before eating, the biscuits had to be soaked in coffee, tea, broth, or just water. This process was a mandatory ritual at any campsite. The hot liquid penetrated the pores of the breadcrumbs, making them softer and more pliable. The softened hardtack changed its structure and became similar to a clumsy piece of bread. Sometimes it took a few minutes, sometimes much longer, but only after softening did it become edible. The liquid softened the structure of the dough, turning it into something like dumplings that could be chewed. This method of preparation made the dish more filling and warm. The soggy biscuits absorbed the aroma of the drink they were thrown into. This improved the taste a little. Soldiers often added salt or a piece of bacon to them. This made the food more varied. The biscuits were often crushed with a hammer or rifle butt and added to soup as a thickener. This method was convenient if the biscuits were too old or particularly hard. The crumbs quickly softened in the hot broth. The soup turned out thick, warm, and nutritious. It gave strength and warmth on cold nights. It was ideal for long marches. The resulting thick soup was very filling and kept the stomach full for a long time. This is why soldiers especially appreciated biscuits. Even a small portion of soup could give strength until the end of the day. Such food was simple but surprisingly effective. It helped to withstand heavy loads and did not require complicated preparation. Another way to prepare them was to fry the soaked biscuits in lard or fat. Frying made them taste better and richer. The crust became golden and the inside soft. This allowed for some variety in the monotonous diet. Soldiers considered this dish a real treat. It quickly became popular. This dish was called Hellfire Stew and was popular among soldiers during the Civil War. and then migrated into the lives of settlers. The name reflected its simplicity and coarseness. People ate it at rest stops, in camps, and in temporary fortifications. The dish became a symbol of military life. It remained popular for a long time. Its simplicity made it accessible to everyone. Galettes were a symbol of endurance. They did not spoil, did not require special conditions, and were always ready to eat if there was water nearby. Neither time nor weather could break them. They reflected the spirit of those who were exploring a new world. They were just as strong and resilient, and just as indispensable a part of history. It was food for people made of the same dough, tough and indestructible. When the meat was eaten and the salted meat was coming to an end, the bones came into play, the last reserve of calories of animal origin. The settlers knew that inside the bones lay nutritious marrow and collagen, capable of sustaining strength in times of hunger. Bones were never thrown away immediately. They were saved for a special occasion. To extract all the nutrients, the bones were chopped into small pieces to expose the bone marrow. They were then boiled in large amounts of water for many hours, sometimes up to 2 days. Prolonged cooking allowed the connective tissues to dissolve and produce a rich, thick broth that turned into jelly as it cooled. This jelly was a concentrate of protein and minerals, vital to an emaciated body. Bone marrow was considered a special delicacy and a valuable product because of its high-fat content. It could be boiled in broth or baked directly in the bone, and then spread on bread or crackers like butter. Even old sun-bleached bones found on the prairie were sometimes used in times of extreme hunger. They were crushed into powder and boiled in an attempt to obtain at least some broth, although the nutritional value of such a concoction was minimal. Everything that could be found was added to the broth. Leftover vegetables, wild herbs, grains, or pieces of dry skin. The result was a thick soup that warmed and gave a feeling of fullness for a long time. This approach to using food from nose to tail was the norm on the frontier. Throwing away a bone that still had even a drop of fat on it was considered criminal waste. Bone broth was often given to sick and weakened people as an easily digestible food to restore their strength. Pioneers intuitively understood the healing properties of this product long before scientific evidence was available. After cooking, the bones were not thrown away completely. They could be used to make buttons, needles, or tools. Waste-free production was the key to survival far from stores and factories. The ability to cook a hearty soup from nothing was one of the main skills of a housewife in the Wild West. This broth was the quintessence of vitality, squeezed from the harsh nature to the last drop. With the advent of railroads and the onset of the Great Depression, a new type of pioneer appeared: hobos, wandering workers. Their cuisine was based on the principles of collectivism and mutual aid, and the main dish was the famous Mulligan stew. This dish had no recipe. Its composition was determined by what each participant in the meal was able to obtain. In the hobo camps located near the railroad tracks, there was always a fire burning over which hung a large communal pot. Anyone who wanted a portion had to contribute to the common pot. One person might bring a couple of potatoes stolen from a garden, another a handful of beans, and a third some chicken giblets or a bone. All of this was thrown into boiling water, creating an unpredictable but filling mixture of flavors. Sometimes completely unexpected ingredients ended up in the stew, such as canned fish or leftover porridge from the previous day. The main rule was, everything edible goes in. Nothing should go to waste. Mulligan stew was cooked for a long time. The ingredients were boiled down to a homogeneous mass, which allowed the lower quality of some products to be concealed. The thick soup was the perfect food for cold nights under the open sky. This dish had enormous social significance, bringing together completely different people around the campfire. Over a bowl of this stew, vagabonds shared news about work, warned each other about evil policemen, and told stories. There was an unspoken rule: You couldn't just come and eat without offering something in return, even if it was just water or firewood. Freeloaders were not respected in the hobo community and could be kicked out of the camp. Tobacco or pepper was often added for flavor to mask the smell of stale food, if any. The taste of this stew was the taste of freedom and brotherhood, mixed with the bitterness of poverty and wandering. Such stone soups were prepared not only by the hobo community, but also by slum dwellers, combining the meager resources of several families. It was a survival strategy for a community where it was easier to feed themselves together than alone. Mulligan stew became a symbol of an era when people who had lost everything found support in each other. This dish proved that even in the darkest times, humanity and mutual aid helped to survive. The most perfect survival food on the frontier, adopted from the indigenous peoples, was pemmican. It was a concentrated source of energy, a mixture of dried, shredded bison or deer meat with melted fat and sometimes berries. Pemmican could be stored for years without any packaging and did not spoil even in the summer heat. The process of making it was laborious. The meat had to be cut into thin strips, dried in the sun or over smoke until crisp, and then ground into powder. This meat powder was mixed with hot fat in a 1-to-1 ratio. The resulting mass was packed into leather bags, where it solidified into dense briquettes. Pemmican was incredibly high in calories. A small piece could sustain an adult man for a whole day of hard travel. Trappers and explorers valued pemmican for its compactness and lack of need for cooking. It could be eaten dry on the go or boiled in water to make a thick soup. Dried meat or jerky was a simpler option available to every hunter. Strips of meat were salted and dried in the wind and sun until they became tough as leather. Jerky required good teeth and patience, as it had to be chewed for a long time to soften the fibers. But it was light and didn't take up much space in a bag, making it an ideal snack. Unlike salted meat, pemmican and jerky did not cause severe thirst, which was critically important in conditions of water scarcity. It was the ideal camping food, created for people who were constantly on the move. European settlers were initially skeptical of pemmican, but quickly appreciated its properties when their own supplies ran low. It became a currency in the fur trade, valued on par with beaver pelts. Pemmican had a distinctive, fatty and bland taste unless sour berries were added. But no one ate it for pleasure. It was pure fuel for survival in the wild. These preservation techniques allowed people to venture into the most remote corners of the continent without relying on food supplies. Pemmican and jerky are the taste of true independence and freedom in the Wild West. The history of frontier settlement is not only a history of battles and gold, but also a history of pots, pans, and empty stomachs. We see that the ability to adapt and find food where there seems to be none was the key survival skill. Pioneers turned necessity into a virtue, creating a unique culinary tradition based on resilience and ingenuity. From vinegar pies to bone broths, each of these dishes tells a story of the human spirit refusing to give up in the face of hunger. These recipes, born out of necessity, remind us of the price people paid to settle new lands. Which of these last chance dishes did you find most surprising or conversely repulsive? Would you like to see an experiment in cooking one of them in our next videos? Write your suggestions in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories about life on the edge of possibility.